Can we identify the little horn in Daniel 8?
Okay, good question. What we're going to do is, can you pull up my accordance screen? And I'm just going to take you through the text here.
Sure.
Good. I've got the Hebrew on the left, and we'll refer to that as we need to, but I've got the English on the right. Okay, so let's, here's the vision, and we know this pretty well. I think we're acquainted with this. Here's a ram, okay? Ram attacks the he-goat. We know what the directions are really indicative of where they come from, aren't they? Look, the ram, and then also the physical shape of the animal. Two horns, both horns were high. One was higher than the other. The high one came up last. This is relevant to the historical identification because this is representing an empire, as we're going to see. And this really fits this particular empire. Now, these animals don't look just like, in every respect, animals that we're going to see. I have a friend here who's a veterinarian, lives just down the street, and she has animals like this. I mean, she has goats, she has llamas, and all kinds of things. These animals in Daniel and also in Revelation don't just look like this because they have things that are symbolic of political, military, and so on realities. Okay, so then we have the ram charges what directions? Westward, northward, southward. Okay, if he's going these three directions, expanding there, which direction does he come from? Which one's left out? From the east, right? Okay, that's important. And so he comes from the east, he goes in all those directions. And then a male goat came from the west explicitly without touching the ground. Did you ever see a goat run without touching the ground?
No, and that's an important point actually, because at some point in the paper, the particular critic they're responding to, you recall, he says that you can't have the little horn be greater than the beast he's riding. But I noticed how you explained that. Well, it's just a symbolic because the same fashion you can't have a he goat flying, running without touching the ground.
Yeah, and also he has one conspicuous horn between his eyes, so he's a unicorn. Did you ever see a unicorn? Yeah, it looks kind of like a rhinoceros, a goatoceros. And then he comes to the ram and he smashes the ram, and he's very angry and tramples him and so on. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn is broken. Instead of it, there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. Now let's go that far and go into the interpretation because the angel interprets it at the end of the chapter. Let's see what he says. Here comes the angel, and he wants to understand. And then, as for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. Here is our anchor point, okay, for interpreting this vision. It rules out idealism. You start with a historical anchor point, and that's in the time of Daniel, okay? That is to say that this particular power is there. He's already expanded under Cyrus, or is in the process right then. Cyrus II was the great conqueror of Media and Persia. Now, this is also crucial for another reason. Notice, this is the kings of Media and Persia. And we're going to see one of the arguments that the preterist uses. We have Media and then Persia as separate kingdoms. They've got to have that to make it work. But this doesn't work because it was already a combined empire, because Cyrus II already had defeated Media by 550 BC before he conquered Babylon. So he comes into Babylon and takes over, like going from the head of gold to the chested arms of silver in Daniel 2, after he already has Media and Persia. And you notice in the book of Esther, you have the laws of the kings of the Medes and Persians, also in the book of Daniel, chapter 6, in the narrative. The goat is the king of Greece. So now we know two things. We have historical, political identifications of empires. Secondly, they come one after the other. And we know that these in history, we can go to Wikipedia, you just look it up, it's public domain, and we know who the king of Greece, the great horn between his eyes, is the first king. Who's the first king?
Alexander the Great.
Yeah. Historicists, preterists, I don't know about idealists, but futurists all agree on that. They cannot disagree. It's explicit. All right. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, so he was broken. When he was 33 years old, he died. We don't know exactly. Could have been a combination. Battle wounds, malaria, drunkenness, whatever. Alexander the Great died. And then his young son was murdered. And on his deathbed, his general said, "Who's the kingdom going to go to?" And he said, "To the strongest." And so they fought for the rest of centuries to take it over. Okay, so four others arose. Now there were, yes, generals, but by the time the dust settled, there were four Macedonian or Greek kingdoms that took over from Alexander's empire. There was Antigonid, Macedonia. There was Attalid Pergamum, which is Turkey. There was Seleucid Syria, which was the bulk of the kingdom, going from Syria and eastward towards Iran. And then there was Ptolemaic Egypt, which for a long time controlled Israel. So Israel was between the Ptolemies in the south and the Seleucids on the north, and they fought over it. And eventually the Seleucids took over that. And that is in Daniel chapter 11. The king of the north, the king of the south. That's what that's all about. Okay, so four kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. None of them were as strong as he was. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, will arise. His power will be great, not by his own power. He'll cause fearful destruction, succeeding what he does, destroy mighty men and the people who are saints. This is persecution, right? Destroying the saints, the holy ones, God's people. This is persecution. He'll make deceit prosper in his hand. In his own mind, he'll become great. Without warning, he'll destroy many. He'll even rise up against the prince of princes, but he'll be broken, but not by no human hand. Meaning, God will destroy him. Now, let's go back. That's the interpretation, but let's go back to verse 8. This is where the challenges come in. Verse 8. And this is what the guy picked up on that I was responding to. And Desmond Ford has as well. And this is a preterist idea. All right, now the argument goes, we have Alexander the Great, who's Greek, right? Then we have the four Greek kingdoms. Out of one of the Greek kingdoms came a little horn. Therefore, this little horn must be Greek. Okay, that's the argument. The little horn must be Greek. And if this is then the little horn power in the chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, where you have the great lion who is representing Babylon. It's the same as the head of gold. And then you have the bear, lopsided bear, like you remember the horns of the ram are kind of lopsided. And then you have the third power is the leopard. And then the fourth power is this T-Rex monster power, okay, which is the equivalent of the little horn here. Now, what the preterists do is they say, power number 1, yes, Babylon. Power number 2, yes, Medo-Persia. We agree with him on that. But then they want to say that power number 4, which is this great monster, which has the little horn on it, has got to be, the fourth power has got to be a Greek power because of this here, because the little horn arises from a Greek power. Now, to make that a Greek power, you have to go Babylon, Persia, then Media, and then Persia. No, Media, and then Greece, sorry.
Then
okay,
Greece, yeah.
Babylon, Babylon,
Medo.
Media, sorry, Babylon, Media,
then Persia,
and then Greece. That's
and then
it.
Greece, yeah. I read that in your paper, I remember.
Media, Persia, and Greece, with the fourth kingdom as Greece. And so that means that this now introduces Antiochus Epiphanes here. And he does all this bad stuff. And then he's the big bad guy, the king of the north in chapter 11. He's the big bad guy in chapter 7. And he is Greek. And this is what the guy argued who I was responding to. Now, how do we respond to that? Out of one of them, from one of them. Now, I'm just going to tell you what I think now. I used to use a different argument, but I'm not going to confuse you with that. Out of one of them. You notice that back down here in the end of the chapter with the introduction, with the explanation, we have at the latter end of their kingdom, right? At the latter end of the rule of the four kingdoms, a king of bold face shall arise. Okay, so at the latter end of their kingdom, did Antiochus Epiphanes arise at the latter end of the four Greek kingdoms? Did he? No, he was the 8th of 20. There were a number of others. It wasn't at the end at all. He was the
Yeah,
son
he
of
was the eighth. He was towards the beginning of the line of those
yeah,
kings, right?
kind of in the middle. There's a bunch of them after that, and so that doesn't work for one thing. And then he grew exceedingly great. All right, now this is one thing where the guy I was responding to objected to my interpretation of this, because notice that this translation, which is ESV, it's not an Adventist translation. It's the evangelical study version, ESV. No, it's it's the English Standard Version, but it was done by evangelicals. It's the English Standard Version, and here it translates exceedingly great. Notice here I have an accordance, and I can click on the English word. Okay, not that. Click on that word exceedingly, and see the word in Hebrew that pops up on the left. You see, it's highlighting the Hebrew word. That's a wonderful thing about accordance. That word is yeter. Now, what the guy that I was responding to, he says, no, that's not a good interpretation of that, because yeter means the remainder, or the excess. Now, you see, the problem for him with this exceedingly idea is that if Cyrus with the ram is very great, see, he became great, just became great. All right, there it is, big deal. Then here comes Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great becomes very great, or exceedingly great. So it's even more. See, ad ma'od, higdil ad ma'od, same word, but it adds this adverb, exceedingly great. But then we have here, and he higdil, or tigdal yeter. Okay, so if he is even greater than Alexander the Great or Cyrus the Great, then this could not possibly be Antiochus Epiphanes. So to get around that objection, then this person I was responding to takes issue with my interpretation of yeter. Now, if I double click on that, we can pull up a lexicon here, and yeah, I get all sorts of study tools here. But here's Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon, and I want this word yeter. Here we go. There. Okay. Well, all right. For some reason, it's pulling all that up. I'll get it here. All right, yeter. Okay, yeter. Okay, here's the rest, or what's left behind. See that? The rest of the remainder. So what he said was, this verse means that this power grew to the remainder of its power. So it doesn't mean that it has to be as great or greater than Cyrus and Alexander. It just means it grew to the remainder of its power. And this is Antiochus Epiphanes. All right, notice that that's not what the lexicon thinks. This lexicon was done not by Adventists, but they say excessively, very great indeed, or exceedingly, because of the context. And just because the majority of the uses are here with this kind of meaning, you can't just import this meaning into there without taking the context into account. That's right. To do so is a methodological flaw that's very common, including among theologians and so on, scholars, and it's called illegitimate totality transfer. This is the term given to it by James Barr in his 1961 book called The Semantics of Biblical Language. And this illegitimate, okay, it means it's wrong. Totality means you take a word here and then you import into it the total meaning of a word from its usages in all the other places. And then you import that here, and that's what it means here. No, what he says is each instance of meaning of a word is determined by its context. Okay? Now, let me give you an example, and you will never forget what illegitimate totality transfer is if I give you this example. Okay? Maybe some of you, maybe it dates you, maybe some of you remember when you were little kids, there was a cartoon called the Flintstones. You remember the Flintstones? Anyone?
I remember the Flintstones. Yeah, one of my favorites.
We didn't have a TV at home, but some of my friends did, and sometimes we watched the Flintstones. All right. Now, do you remember the theme song of the Flintstones? Anyone?
Flintstones. Meet the Flintstones.
We'll have a, what's the next word? Gay old time. Oh, yeah. The Flintstones were homosexual. Because gay means homosexual.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
So that takes the total meaning of the words will have a gay old time. That's the total meaning of words at a given period of time, which is now. That happens to be anachronistic, which means it doesn't
Right.
time period because it didn't mean that then. All right, it came to mean it later, and so
Yeah.
so that is importing meaning from another context and plugging it in. Now you remember what illegitimate totality transfer is, and to do that
Yeah.
with the word is that.
Can I give another example of that? Because I brought this issue up before with the word Sabbath as well in the New Testament. Another good word to kind of help you remember is the word frog. If you look it up in the if you Google it, it'll tell you it means an amphibian basically.
Yeah.
But you don't mean an amphibian when you say I have a frog in my throat, right?
Right.
Obviously, you have a sore throat. A frog can have multiple meanings depending on the context. And I was kind of looking at this as I was reading your paper prior, and I thought of this. There's multiple examples of this both in English, in Spanish as well, because I speak Spanish, and of course in Hebrew. But I think what you're really bringing out here is something crucial: is that the context is what's going to determine the meaning. And from my reading of the context, and you tell me if I'm going somewhere with this, it's successively going greater and greater and greater. I mean, if the first beast is great and the next one is very great, then it's not going to go back down to being less. It seems logical. It's going to go to be even greater, the little horn.
You're
So
right.
you're
Now,
saying that by way of context, right?
absolutely, that's right. And in any language, we have words that can mean different things. I mean, port can be a place where a ship docks. It could be the left side of a ship, or it can be an alcoholic beverage. All right, for example, in different languages, the word gift, as a present in English and German, it means poison. Right. So
Wow.
you got to be careful with language. So here is a case. Now, here's another thing that you can do when you're faced with an interpretation like that. Go with it, plug it in and see if it works. So let's plug in the meaning that has been suggested. What if it means remainder? The remainder of its growth. Does that work? Well, look at the next verse. It grew great even to the host of heaven. Has it grown that way in the previous verse? No. Therefore, does the previous verse mean that it grew to the remainder of its power in that verse? No. Therefore, that could not be the meaning in that verse. See what I'm saying?
Context. Yeah.
Context. All right. And the lexicons are taking the context into account. They're not looking up Ellen White. They're not looking up the Seventh Adventist fundamental beliefs. In fact, Hallowed, Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, was originally begun by Köhler and Baumgartner, and Köhler was a Nazi. Yeah, which is why my Jewish teachers didn't use his lexicon, interestingly. Okay, so let's go on a little bit more then. So I'm going to leave that lexicon there. We may apply to that a little bit further. Out of one of them, is it true that another power came out of the four horns? What happened historically? All right. And notice that, as Martin Probstley has said in his wonderful big long dissertation, PhD dissertation here at Andrews University on Daniel 8:9-14, he pointed out that in each of these little sections, see on the ram, we have the ram has three pieces of information: description of the symbol, right? Its horns, direction, and then indication of greatness, right? Then the goat, description of the goat, direction, indication of greatness. Okay, and that indicates a certain kind of power, right? Now you come down to the so-called little horn. It doesn't say little horn. That's not what the Hebrew says. The horn says Keren Echad Mitza'ira, from littleness. What does that mean? He starts out little, but he gets big. He becomes the Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah.
And then we have, his last stand is the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Anyone know about Custer's last stand at the Battle of the Little Bighorn? That's what it was called. Okay, so that's very appropriate. And he grows great, but he starts off. This word can be younger or smaller, and he's a latecomer, and then he grows great towards these directions. Okay, so what we have is the description of the symbol, and then we have his greatness, and we have the directions of expansion. So these three things indicate a separate power. It's not just one more person in the dynasties of the Seleucids or the Ptolemies or whatever, because that would be included in the four horns, the four horns, included Antiochus, right? One of those four horns was the Seleucid horn, which included Antiochus as a member of that horn. Here is a new power that came at the latter end of their rule, came out of one of the, and this is what happened. What direction did it come from? Let's look. Toward the south, toward the east, toward the glorious land, which is the land of Israel.
Israel.
We find that in Ezekiel, where that language is used. It's called the Sevi, okay? This word right here, glorious land. The most glorious of all lands is the promised land, okay? Now, if we look at what directions it comes from or goes to, how can we deduce where it comes from? Toward south, toward east. It's coming from the northwest, right? And then in between the north and the west is the glorious land, which is the land of Israel. Now, if this were the Seleucid power, it wouldn't have to say independently toward the glorious land. If this is Antiochus, Antiochus was, his capital was in Damascus in Syria. He would have come straight south. It would have been toward the south to come into Palestine. Not only that, he didn't conquer Palestine. His father conquered Palestine. That's in Daniel 11, verse 16, where he conquered Palestine, took it over from the Ptolemies. It doesn't work for Antiochus at all. What is the power that supersedes? It comes at the latter end of the rule of all of these. It supersedes all of them, and it comes from the northwest. You just got to look at a map. What is it? Look at a history book. What is it? Rome. Did it go toward the south? Yeah. Carthage, the Punic Wars, right? And took over that toward the east. And in fact, it came in first. The first of the Greek empires that it took over, the Greek kingdoms, was Antigonid Macedonia, which is Greece and Macedonia. Took over that, and it came from that direction. Then it just gradually gobbled up the rest. Pergamum, the last king, willed his kingdom to Rome. That's how they got that one. And then the Seleucids, the Romans defeated Antiochus III, the Great, the father of Antiochus Epiphanes, in two battles at Thermopylae and Magnesia, so definitively that number one, Antiochus III, who had been going up and trying to expand up to take over Greece, he was made to give up all of his northern territories, including along the coastlands of Turkey. He had to give up all that territory, and he had to pay a huge amount of indemnity to a lot of money to Rome. And furthermore, he had to give up one of his sons as a hostage, who spent part of his growing up years in Rome. And you know who that was? Antiochus the Fourth, the guy that became Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes. He spent his growing up years, part of them, in Rome. So is this the great power, Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanes, who was always then, from then on, subject to Roman power? The Seleucids never got out from underneath the conditions put on them by the Romans in terms of the size of their armies, giving them tribute, and all that kind of stuff. They didn't get out of that. This has got to be Rome for all these reasons.
Pastor Gain, I remember reading at one point in a book by Uriah Smith where he asked the question. He says, "Who's greater, the one paying the tribute or the one demanding the tribute?" Right, and evidently, the one demanding the tribute, which was Rome, making Antiochus pay the tribute.
That's right. Yep. And now let's see. Okay, which power is this that did this, that grew exceedingly great and took over the four kingdoms? Was it Imperial Rome? Imperial Rome, the first emperor was Augustus. His earlier name was Octavian, right? But he was the he followed his relative or adopted relative, Julius Caesar. Okay. Now the great expansion of Rome came before Imperial Rome. It came under Republican Rome. It was still a republic. And that's where Julius Caesar got in trouble, because he tried to usurp the power of the republic and make it into an empire with him as the emperor. Now Octavian succeeded in that, but it was the Republican Rome that took over this, and Imperial Rome expanded further. But then what is this all about? It grew great even to the host of heaven. What is the host of heaven? Who owns the host of heaven? God, right? Some of the hosts, some of the stars, it threw down to the ground and trampled them. Now, what does that mean? Well, later on, we find out. It says down here that we have his power will be great. He shall cause fearful destruction. He'll succeed in what he does, destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. It's persecution. And these are people who belong to God. They belong to the hosts of heaven. All right. And so trampling down the hosts of heaven to the ground, it became great, even as great as the prince of the host. Who's the prince of the host? What about in Joshua chapter 5? Who is the captain of the Lord's host in Joshua chapter 5?
Lord, it's Jesus.
It's the member of the Godhead that appears to him. It says, you got to take off your feet because you're standing on holy ground. This is God. And which member of the Godhead is the one whose goings forth are from of old, according to Micah 5, verse 2, who appears to human beings? It's the Word. The Word means communication. In the beginning was the Word, and that is Christ who became flesh, dwelt among us. John 1, verse 14. So this is Christ is the prince of the heavenly host, which includes, yes, the angels, but we belong to his heavenly host as well. We're his workers, his people who have been persecuted through the ages are part of the heavenly host. And now this is a mistranslation because burnt offering is not here in the Hebrew. Okay. Almost all the English translations say burnt offering. Now that plays into the hands of the preterists because they say, aha, this is the burnt offering that was interfered with by Antiochus Epiphanes. He stopped the burnt offering of the Jews, had a pig offered there on the altar and so on. And this is Antiochus Epiphanes. And so, but the problem is that word isn't in the Hebrew. The Hebrew word is hatamid, regular. And that's this word right here, which means regularity. Okay, so it is hatamid means the regularity or that which is regular.
Right, now, the ha means the definite article in the Hebrew, right?
That which is regular. And this is referring to something that belongs to the prince of the host. What is regular that was taken away from him by a Roman power, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown? What is this talking about? Okay, what is regular? If you look at the Old Testament, this word tamid is used, yes, with regard to the regular burnt offering in Exodus chapter 29, verses 38 to 42, Numbers 28, 1 to 8, but it also refers to other kinds of regular worship,
right?
Including in Exodus 30, verses 7 and 8, you've got the incense and the lights. In Leviticus chapter 24, verse 8, you have there the regular bread, which is once a week, placed before God. So what does this mean? It's the regular worship of God by his people on earth. All right. Mm-hmm. And then this is taken away. How's it taken away? By the Roman power through persecution. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
And so Christ is no longer receiving his due, which is this worship of him, as a result of that persecution by the Roman power. Are we just talking about pagan imperial Rome at this point now? Or does it look like a religious kind of power?
Well, it does. It goes from horizontal to vertical at one point, right?
It does. It goes vertical. See, this is going up great vertically up to the prince of the host. He's up there, right? So before it was just like all the other powers. The ram came in these horizontal directions. The he-goat came from the west horizontally. And then this little horn power starts off horizontally, and then it goes vertically. It goes ballistic. Now, there's one problem that has been raised, and that is in chapter 7, the preceding chapter of Daniel, the little horn is on the fourth beast. The fourth beast is Rome, which is pagan, that is Republican imperial Rome. And then the little horn grows out of that power. But here, the power that supersedes the Greek power is simply the little horn, which represents all phases, both phases, Republican imperial, that is pagan Rome, and then also the church Rome, which is what we're into with the vertical expansion here. So how does that work? Why? Well, because it was true that there was an organic connection. The Church of Rome grew organically out of pagan Rome. So, and if you look in the history books, this is absolutely true. The powers of pagan Rome gradually shifted because Constantine, you remember, became a Christian. Justinian, the Eastern Roman Emperor, was Christian, and he appointed the Bishop of Rome as over all of the churches in the West. So now you have the leadership is transformed into a religious kind of a power, which becomes a church state power, which becomes a persecuting power, and then it brings all kinds of freight with it. So this is an organic connection. In fact, the title, which was belonging to the Roman emperors, which is Pontifex Maximus, it was really a divine title for a divine priesthood. Pontifex Maximus means in Latin the great bridge builder. Okay, that is between heaven and earth, bridge builder. Who is the bridge builder? What did Jesus say in John 1:51 to Nathanael? He says, "You will see angels ascending and descending on the Son of Man." He is the ladder, Jacob's ladder between heaven and earth. He is the great bridge builder. So for anyone else to take that title is blasphemy, to take his place, right? Okay, and so this title was taken over then by the bishops of Rome and so on, of the church. Then it became great, even as the Prince of the Host. And of course, in 2 Thessalonians 2, it says that he vaunted himself to be as great as God in the New Testament. Also, Daniel 11 has this idea. Daniel 11, verses 36 to 39. You can see that same parallel. You can see the same kind of thing in Revelation chapter 13, where it's a usurper of Christ taking over the place of Christ. It is Antichrist. Okay, and what did First John say that Antichrist was? Anyone who denies that Christ came in the flesh. Well,
in the flesh, yeah.
In the flesh, what is? Well, you look at the Mass. What is the Mass? It's a continuation of a so-called sacrifice, right? Sacrifice, as if Christ has to be sacrificed all over again, as if he didn't do what he accomplished to do. And an earthly priesthood, a sacramental ordained priesthood on earth, sacramental ordination, okay? We won't get into that topic, but that means that this earthly priesthood then is taking over the role of Christ. And if there's an earthly priesthood like that, that indicates that Christ hasn't come to earth to do what he said he was going to do. So therefore, that's Antichrist. See that? All right. So this is then a usurping kind of religion. So Christ's regular worship is taken away from it. When it says the place of his sanctuary was overthrown, when is that? If we're already into the time of the Church of Rome, which parallels chapter 7, the little horn there, then we know that this is after 70 AD. In AD 70, the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed. So this could not be the place of the Jerusalem temple, as the preterists, the people with this Antiochus Epiphanes idea, say. They say that this is Antiochus doing this. Well, for one thing, it's too late. For another thing, he was Greek, not Roman. For another thing, he never destroyed the temple.
Yeah. Right. Never.
Yeah, what he did was cause all kinds of trouble. He defiled it. They had to rededicate it. They did with the Feast of Dedication called Hanukkah, which Jews still celebrate today. It's around Christmas time in December. And Jesus celebrated that Feast of Dedication in the book of John. But he didn't ever destroy the sanctuary itself. Now then it says, a host will be given against, this isn't really a good translation here, but there's no good translation. Okay, so I'm going to tell you what the Hebrew says. I'm looking at the Hebrew. And a host will be given over or against the regular, that is the regular worship of God by his people, in or by means of transgression, or the word really means rebellion. So a host is against the regular worship of God by his people in transgression. This is rebellious human activity by this little horn power, which is against the regular worship of God by his people, and it's done by a host. This word can mean an army, or it can mean a large workforce. What would that be? What's the large army or workforce that is delegated by this Roman power, this religious Roman power, to to go against the regular worship of God by his people because it takes its place. What is that? What's that host? That is the earthly priesthood, the kind of priesthood that sits behind the confessional booth. And when you come to confess your sins, they say, I absolve you. God has never, ever given any human being, not even the sons of Aaron, their right to forgive sins. If you go to Leviticus chapter 4, the priest does the ritual of expiation, but then it says, and it will be forgiven him. See, God himself does the forgiveness. In Mark chapter 2, there you have, remember the man let down, the paralytic let down through the roof, right? They dug a hole, let him down. And Jesus says, your sins are forgiven you. And then the doctors of the law, you know, the doctor of ministry and PhD graduates, the scribes, all those guys, they say, he's blaspheming. Only God can forgive sins like that, because they realize it's not just forgiving another person for what he's done to me. That's what we do. He's forgiving as God forgives. He's committing blasphemy. And they were right, unless Jesus were God. See? God has never, ever given anyone the right to forgive sins like that. Jesus has the right because he is God. And so this is a blasphemous power. That host is the priesthood, the earthly priesthood. Together, okay, against us, not together with. It's a mistranslation. And it will throw truth to the ground. It'll act and prosper. And then comes this little dialogue in heaven. I heard a holy one speaking. Another holy one said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision? And then this is a mistranslation here. It says concerning the regular burnt offering.
Right.
The preterists say, this is about the regular burnt offering just taken away by Antiochus. Okay. That's not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew says, until when is the vision? Colon. Doesn't say the vision of the regularity. It says until when is the vision? And then
so the word concerning is not there.
Right. It's summarizing all these things. And it's in reverse order. It's referring to them in chiastic or reverse order, which is a nice brief summary. What's all this about? And it uses keywords. The regularity, the desolating rebellion, to give the desolating rebellion, because up here it's Tina Tane, remember? See, it uses the same to give, it's given. And giving the desolating rebellion, again, the Hebrew, actually the Masoretes who did the punctuation here did it wrong. I'll go into the details. I think I know why, but it should be translated, and giving the desolating rebellion, okay, and the Kodesh, which is the sanctuary, and a host, a trampling, that is trampling a host. So it's going back through the passage, through this vision, in reverse order, to refer to the bad things that are done by this particular power. For how long is all of this? Now, what the preterists say, and the guy I was responding to, is this is about Antiochus, and this is the length of time that Antiochus was causing problems in Jerusalem against the Jews. And we know from the book of Maccabees precisely how long it was. It was 3 years and 10 days. Okay, 3 years and 10 days. But then the answer to this is 2,300 evenings. Evening, morning, literally, but with a large number. It uses singular collective. So it's 2,300 evenings, mornings. Then the sanctuary will be, and this is not what it's saying really, it means justified. It'll be justified, okay? Restored to its rightful state, see, is a way to allow Antiochus to go in there, because it's restored to its rightful state through the rededication and so on, but it means justified. That justified then hooks into really Leviticus chapter 16, because there, through the ritual, that's how the sanctuary, representing God and his character, his reputation, is justified. And very interestingly, the Septuagint, the Greek translation, uses the word katharisthesetai, which means cleansed. And fascinatingly, that's how the JPS Torah commentary, the Jewish commentary or translation, says it. JPS is Jewish Publication Society. So it's the NJPS, New Jewish Publication Society. A Jewish translation shall be cleansed.
And
Now, what does that mean? It shall be cleansed. This hooks in, of course, with Daniel, or rather Leviticus chapter 16, where there is ritual cleansing. This word is not used, but a synonym is used, taher, that shows up as a synonym in Job 4:17. And what happens in Leviticus 16 is it is a ritual cleansing, yes, from impurity, but this is representing legal justification of God for what he's done, a vindication of God. So this word means legal cleansing. Okay. Also, NKJV has that. So does King James have this. But I showed you the Jewish one because that's particularly striking that a Jewish translation would have that. Okay. So does this refer then to Antiochus Epiphanes? How do you get 2,300 evenings and mornings to come out to be 3 years and 10 days? How do you get that? Okay, well, let's pull up a calculator. Do you have a calculator you can pull up? I have one on my computer, but I've got my screen sharing here. Can you pull up a calculator? And, well,
Sure.
got it, Jay? You want me to put it up?
I got it.
Okay, you got it?
Oh,
Pull up a calculator.
yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Put in 2,300.
2,300.
Divided by 360, which is a rounded number of days in a year. And that's what we find in prophetic years in Revelation. See, that's what works with 42 months, 1,260 days, and 3.5 times. It all works with a 360-day year, which is a rounded year. We know that our year is 365 and 1/4 and a little bit, right? Okay, that's 6.3 literal years. Now, that's too long for Antiochus Epiphanes, isn't it? Because for him, it was 3 years and 10 months. All right, so how do we reduce this? Well, here's the way the preterists reduce that. They say, this is evenings and mornings. Evening, morning. Oh, this is 2,300 morning and evening burnt offerings, because we have the regular burnt offering, which is not in the Hebrew, but they say it's implied here. So regular burnt offerings, there's 2,300. So we divide the number by 2 in order to get the number of, here's the number of burnt offerings in the morning, and here's the number of burnt offerings in the evening. So you split it in 2 to get the number of days. Okay. And if you split 2,300 in 2, what do you get? 1,150.
150.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how close is that to 3 years and 10 days? Let's take 3 times 360 plus 10. Let's see how much that comes out to be.
All right. 3 times 360
plus 10.
Equals, okay, now plus 10.
That's the number of days. 1,000.
So 1,090.
Okay, so 1,090 is the number of days that Antiochus Epiphanes persecuted the Jews. 1,090. Is that the same as 1,150, which is half of 2,300? No, it doesn't work. But there's other reasons why it doesn't work. First of all, it doesn't work because it's evenings and mornings. Oh, the burnt offering was not evening and morning; it was morning and evening. So it doesn't the burnt offering, which is the only one of the regular rituals which was evening to morning, had that kind of a cycle, which is the only one that went that way. From evening
candlesticks
in Exodus. It's in Exodus. From evening until morning is which
the candlesticks, right? The lighting of the candlesticks.
Lampstand. From evening until morning, through the night, continuously, one time from evening until morning in each 24-hour calendar period. Okay, it's not split into 2; it's 1, right? And so it cannot be divided. That's just one reason why it can't be divided up. Furthermore, when you say evening, morning with a number like that, if you look in Deuteronomy, for example, if you have 40 days and 40 nights, what does 40 days and 40 nights mean? Well, 40 days and nights, right?
Yeah.
40 24-hour periods, right? Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. So here's 2,300 evening, morning. It goes together. And so instead of saying 2,300 evenings and 2,300 mornings, that's a bit tedious to say in Hebrew. I'll tell you what it sounds like in Hebrew. Erev Erev 2,300 Boker 2,300. That's kind of a mouthful, right? So it just says evening, morning, just like you don't say 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and okay, they repeat that because it's pretty short, but it could say 40 days and nights, couldn't it? And it would mean the same thing. Okay, so we have here 2,300. What are the evenings and mornings? It makes full days, just like each cycle is through the night. That may be appropriate, huh? We never really thought about that, did we? Evenings and mornings does show up also elsewhere. Genesis 1, the evening and the morning was
the days
1, right?
Mhm.
But this is dealing with the temple. We have the regular worship of God by his people. We have the and we have the lamp cycle is evoked here, and so on. This is a religious context, and so what it sounds to me like is 2,300 nights. Yeah, through all these nights, these dark periods, this is going to be a period of domination by the earthly powers, the great empires, until the sanctuary is justified. And so that's a wonderful message. The pilot light stays on. And then the full light finally dawns after this dark period of all of this long night. And then the light's going to come on. Praise the Lord. And that really confirms Psalm 121, verse 4. What does that say? He who watches over Israel slumbers not nor sleeps. See? And through this dark period, God is always watching over his people. Okay. Now, have we yet identified, to answer that first question, what is the little horn power? I think we have to summarize it before we go on to the next question. And that is, and we've gone already beyond because the other questions pertain to the same text. The little horn power is, first of all, in Daniel 8, verse 9, where you have the horn from littleness. This is Republican Imperial Rome, which expands in the horizontal directions, just as a political power like the earlier ones, right? And then it morphs into this religious power that goes vertical. It does these things, persecuting, it's blasphemous, tries to take away worship from God's people that is his right. And this goes on for all that time, for 2,300 evenings, mornings, until the sanctuary is justified. Now, back in Daniel 7, we had another time period, didn't we? We had the 3.5 times. That's the period of domination of that power in Daniel 7:25, where he wants to think to change times in the law. You remember that? And God's law, of course, includes the Sabbath, which that power has done. And it's for 3.5 times. And so we can talk about when that time begins and so on. But what this is talking about, this goes even beyond the period of domination by that power to cleaning up the mess. You know, when you have a mess that's being created, sometimes there's a little bit of a delay before you start cleaning up the mess, right? And that's what this is talking about, cleaning up the mess. Just as in Daniel chapter 7, you have these line of empires, one after the other, and then the little horn power is the culminating one, the big bad guy. And then you have the solution to that is the judgment in Daniel 8:9-14, the judgment of God, then judges it, and then the second coming of Christ comes. Here in Daniel chapter 8, you have the succession of powers, the little horn power, the justifying of the sanctuary is fulfilling the place where in the previous chapter, it was the judgment is doing that. Oh, how do you justify the sanctuary with a judgment? That's a great question. Thanks for the affirmation. How do you do that? Well, because the background is in Leviticus 16. It's in the Day of Atonement, which was Israel's judgment day, which was a judgment that justified the sanctuary, and it judged between God's loyal people. Leviticus 16, verse 30, they were the ones who received moral purity because they showed themselves loyal on that day. And the disloyal in Leviticus 23, 29, 30, who on the Day of Atonement refused to show loyalty to God by keeping Sabbath. Oh, that's interesting. On that day, and by humbling themselves through self-denial. What are the two things that God's end time people are to do, which is the equivalent? Revelation 14, verse 12. Here are they who keep the commandments of God, all right, which
Have the
includes
faith of Jesus.
and
Mhm.
and the faithfulness of Jesus, who humbled himself. Philippians 2, verse 8. All right, so that's what we do at the end. So that's the background. Here is the end time judgment in Daniel 7, which is accomplished through the examination of the books of record to see what people have done. Why? Because we're saved by works? No, because God's people, that is to say, his created beings in the universe, cannot read thoughts of faith. They have to see the evidence for it. We're saved by grace through faith. But the faith is shown by works of love. Galatians 5, verse 6. And James 2:26, faith without works is dead. So what we see is the works part of the faith in the judgment. And our loyalty is shown. It confirms our assurance so that by the end of the judgment, it's once saved, always saved. Praise the Lord for that. I believe in once saved, always saved at the end of the judgment. It's confirmed. It doesn't take away assurance. It gives us the assurance. And then for sure we're saved. And so that's a wonderful message. But the little horn power is then pagan Rome and then papal Rome. And notice that it's broken by no human power at the end. What does that mean? Well, look at Daniel chapter 2. The last power is broken by the rock that comes down, second coming of Christ.
Right. Right.
Daniel 7, it goes all the way to the end. Daniel 8, here it goes to the end. 2 Thessalonians 2, the lawless one, who is the same power, is broken by that breath of his coming, Jesus Christ coming. It continues all the way to the second coming, which means it's continuing through our time, which is going to raise the question of what are these 2,300 evenings, mornings? But that's another question. Okay, so that was a huge answer to your first question, but that lays the foundation. Everything else flows from there. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I as I was listening to what you were teaching, right, I noticed that you actually went through all four questions already. So the first question was, can we identify the little horn in Daniel 8? You gave the evidence of why it can't be Antiochus Epiphanes, and showing the evidence of why it must be the Church of, Imperial Rome / the Church of Rome. And you did it by what I like to call identification marks, right? Kind of like somebody, like an investigator popping, looking for the clues and then just finding what's the historical figure that matches all those clues. And that's what you did. The other question was, is there a vertical phase to the little horn as Church of Rome? And so you demonstrated that as well in the context of Daniel chapter 8. Does justifying God's sanctuary in heaven equal vindicating his character? You mentioned that towards the end as well. And was Antiochus Epiphanes the little horn? And of course, that kind of goes back a little bit to the previous question and the answer you gave.